Hey friends, welcome back to more Reddit stories about entitled people, crazy people, and all that kind of stuff. And as usual, it's time to read some more Reddit posts about some seriously unhinged people. So make sure to subscribe if you haven't yet, and let's begin. My likeness is not public property. I take the Amtrak to work a couple of days a week, and the station I get on at has a nice neon sign on it. I was walking to work, and thanks to the longer days, it was golden hour. And as I was walking up to the station, the light hitting the station building was perfect, accentuating the purple neon sign in such a lovely way I decided to take a photo of it, mostly because I'm a bit of a train nerd. As I was taking the picture, an older couple pulled into the parking area for drop-off, just as I was taking my photo. A man was getting out of the car and he turned on a swivel looking very agitated and said, "Stop taking my photo immediately," in quite an aggressive manner. I told him that A, I wasn't taking his picture, B, he wasn't even in the shot, and C, he was in public, and as such has little or no control over the situation, then started to explain my reasoning. He put his hand in my face, motioned at my phone with his other hand, and demanded I delete the photo. I refused, explaining again that he wasn't even in the shot, and then he started screaming at me that, quote, "My likeness is not public property. You have to delete the photo." I chuckled, said no, and wandered into the station. Then he followed me in, still angrily huffing and puffing, and made a beeline for the ticket office, now claiming that Amtrak must have rules to prevent people taking photos. I didn't hear the ticket office person's side of the exchange, but it must have been disappointing for the gentleman, because he stormed off. Then he came back over to me and said I had to show him the photo or he'd be, quote, "taking further action." I chuckled again and said I wouldn't be showing him the photo. He kept on at me, so I just put my earbuds in and started listening to my podcast. Then I walked out to the train to him angrily spluttering something or other. The train came in. We both boarded. He was about a third of the way down the carriage, and when the conductor came around, he was talking to him and kept pointing over at me. I'm a regular, so know most of the train crews, and the conductor came to check my ticket and we had our usual morning exchange of pleasantries, and he said nothing of the angry guy. He got off the train at the Coliseum station, eyeballing me as he huffed and puffed his way off the train. Father feels entitled to trespass on my neighbor's land, despite yelling at said neighbor for trespassing on his. This is something that went down between my father, who lives a handful of miles away from me, and the neighbor who lives across the road from me. I was mostly an annoyed viewer of it. So the road my father lives on has had this middle section that's been extremely poorly maintained for as long as he's lived there. About a year and a half ago, he convinced the township to shut down and gate off that section. The lower half of the road where most people live remained as it was. The upper part, where only my father lives, he was told it would cease to be a public road, and since he owned all the land along it on both sides, would effectively become his private property. Essentially, it would turn into an extended driveway for him. They told him that once it was official, they would come and put a sign at the beginning of it showing that it was no longer a public road, and they did. This is all the stuff he told me about. I wasn't there for it. However, before the sign went up, my neighbor, who had just moved in, was driving around getting a feel for the area and turned down my father's future driveway extension. My father saw him and flipped out, screaming at him that he was trespassing on private property, that he was going to call the police and press charges, how he would go get his gun if he didn't leave. The whole time my neighbor was trying to get out an apology, and when he realized he wasn't going to get a word in edgewise, he left. The sign went up a couple days later and the neighbor never went back there again. Fast forward to a few months ago. My father has walked to my place and decides that for the walk back, he's going to cut through the same neighbor's property since it can act as a shortcut. The previous owner used to let him do this, so he thinks this is totally fine even though a different person who has never given him permission owns it now. The neighbor happens to come home while he's doing so and sees him on it. Now, this neighbor has remained polite and friendly with my father in the time since the first incident, whenever he sees him around my place. He calls out a friendly hello to my father, who proceeds to run and make himself look sus as all hell and back. My neighbor hops on his ATV and tries to go find him, but my father hides in the tall weeds to avoid him. Again, this is all relayed to me via rant later. When he can't find my father, he calls the police, who question him, but since he won't admit to it, they can't prove it was him. Nothing comes of it. Now last week, my father is over again and I offhandedly mention needing to set up traps in my lawn and talk to the same neighbor. There's a mother groundhog on my neighbor's property and its kids are trying to come over onto mine to dig. So I hope to trap them and have the neighbor trap the mother so we can humanely relocate them. All fairly normal stuff for this area. My father, without saying a word to me or the neighbor, went over onto his property to try and beat the groundhogs to death with a golf club, and succeeded with one of the young ones. Little did he realize, neighbor put up cameras after the last trespassing incident, and they have clear pictures of him this time. My neighbor called the police, but being the epitome of grace, tells them that he won't press charges this time if my father doesn't lie about it. The police go talk to my father and he lucks his way out of trouble by actually being honest, because he feels completely justified in what he did. Regardless, police inform him that the neighbor doesn't want him on his property ever again, and he will press charges next time. So today, my father has another rant for me about how my neighbor is such a dickhead for making such a big deal out of this, that he should be allowed to walk through their property because the previous owner let him, and there was no reason to act like this towards him because he didn't do anything wrong. And my neighbor is a hypocrite because, quote, he trespasses on me too. Man refuses emergency medical service because masks insult his delicate sensibilities. I'm a firefighter/paramedic for a small suburban department. Our particular community has a lot of retired people, many of whom begin to experience medical problems at an exponential rate as they get older. Last shift, we get a call to a home for difficulty breathing. Most noticeable as we pulled up was, most ironically, a sign depicting a handgun and bullet holes boldly proclaiming, "This house doesn't call 911. Our mere presence at that house proved this was in fact false. Since COVID, I've worn an N95 mask on every single medical call. Our department no longer requires us to do so, but I choose to because I like not getting sick. And I also like not bringing home patients' infectious illnesses to my wife and toddler. I credit this with having not caught COVID once since it all started. Anyway, we entered the house and I called out, "Fire department," which is answered by, "I'm in the back bedroom." I follow the voice to a bedroom where I find a 350-plus pound man sprawled on his bed, audibly wheezing and coughing and looking pale and sweaty. In EMS terms, we call this looking like shit. So yeah, dude needs some intervention. But before I even set my gear down and start my assessment, he says, "Get that f***ing thing off your face." I definitely wasn't expecting that to be our initial interaction, so I asked, "Pardon?" "You heard me. Take off that f***ing mask." Okay, cool. To this guy, it's more important to rage about the PPE I'm wearing than to tell me what he called for or let me treat him. I try to brush it off with an explanation about how this is what I wear for every medical call, but he raises his voice at me and says, "Don't you f***ing touch me wearing that f***ing thing. Masks don't work and Fauci is a traitor and needs to be hung." I asked if he wants help or not, at which point we reach the stage where he pretends not to be able to understand me because the mask allegedly muffles my voice. I have a deep voice and I have been projecting it for hard of hearing old people my entire career. And it was also fairly telling that when I told him, "Sir, you can hear me just fine," his response was, "No, I f***ing can't." Eventually, he demanded that someone else on my crew help him because he was sick of my bullshit. "Alright, sir, you got it." I called my partner and my captain into the room and said he would rather speak to them. So they enter the room, but surprise, they're wearing masks too. Because this house reeks of stale smoke and BO, and this patient is constantly coughing. So he sees 2 more masks in his room, and then the rage really begins, telling us to get out, we're all useless, we're all F-slurs, etc. I asked if he would be willing to sign a document called an Against Medical Advice, which releases us from liability when a patient refuses medical care. His answer was, "F*** no. And I can't hear you with that f***ing cloth on your face." Alright, bud. So we grabbed our gear and filed out. His clearly long-suffering wife caught us at the door and begged us to go back in and take him to the hospital. He's been having so much trouble breathing lately. He sure has, but he's also an adult, at least on paper, who makes his own medical decisions, so legally our hands are tied. I felt a little bad for her, until she dropped on me. You don't need to wear a mask anyway, just take it off for his sake so he'll let you help him. My answer was, sorry ma'am, my body, my choice. Call us back when he goes unconscious or stops breathing. Sure enough, she called back at 4 a.m. as he was knocking at death's door. This time he was too effed up to even know we were in the room, and I ended up having to intubate him and breathe for him mechanically on the way to the hospital. Last I heard, he's going to make it, but I sincerely doubt any lessons were learned along the way. If you don't eat the veggies, you don't eat. Okay. When I was maybe 4, my brother, 6-ish at the time, and I were dropped off at our aunt's house for the weekend. Mom and Dad dropped us off Friday afternoon after lunch, with plans to pick us up Sunday night after dinner and take us straight home to bed. We loved these sleepover weekends, because Aunt had game consoles, board games, a massive playground in the condo complex, a huge pool, and best of all, bunk beds. Friday night, my brother and I discovered that Aunt requires her kids to eat a full bowl of veggies before they're allowed the main course. Friday night was a bowl of green beans, unseasoned, bland, steamed, soggy green beans, before spaghetti and meatballs and chocolate cake. I hated veggies by themselves and refused to eat the green beans. I refused them at dinner. I refused them at breakfast. I refused them at every single meal all weekend, until my parents showed up to pick us up to find me vomiting water, because that's all she'd let me have. Now, my parents would often save uneaten, refused veggies/food for the next meal, but if we refused it 2 meals in a row, the next meal would be different. Aunt refusing to feed me for over 48 hours was completely unacceptable, and my parents never let us stay at her house without them ever again. Bonus. A few weeks later, my mom made green beans seasoned well and mixed in with some rice, peas, and other goodies, and I practically scarfed it down. Mom called Aunt from the kitchen wall phone, 2000 or 2001, and told her, all you had to do was put them in some damn seasoned rice. I still don't like most veggies by themselves, but there are a few I'll eat alone as long as they're cooked and seasoned well. You know, the obvious problem here is that the whole point behind making kids eat vegetables is it's obviously healthy. But refusing to feed a kid for 2 days and making them starve because they wouldn't eat green beans, that's just sadistic, and totally defeats the point of trying to make them eat healthy. I mean, surely a kid not being allowed to eat for 2 days is not more healthy than a kid eating meals with no veggies. Anyway, that's going to be it for today, everyone. Thank you for watching, I appreciate it. Be sure to drop a like on the video if you enjoyed and hit that subscribe button so you can be notified whenever we upload. So I'm out of here, have a nice day, and I'll see you next time.